This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Trump fires a warning at China. Deliver rare earth magnets to the US or face 200% tariffs. Well, this comes as China's top trade negotiator heads to Washington. President Xi hails Beijing-Moscow ties as stable, mature and strategically key, while urging Russia to help safeguard their mutual interests. Seoul lauds the first summit between President Myung and Trump as a success, but observers say key issues remain unresolved. And Japan officially protests China's actions in the East China Sea after discovering Beijing is developing gas fields in waters where Tokyo says their economic zones overlap. Also in East Asia tonight, get to know the Wansei, that is, Japanese citizens born in Taiwan, and how they honor tens of thousands of Taiwanese soldiers who helped Japan during World War II. And a Chinese company carves out its copper corner in Texas, despite turbulent trade tensions between the US and China. Donald Trump firing a fresh warning shot to China, and this time threatening 200% tariffs. In this latest trade threat, the U.S. president wants magnets.
We have tremendous power over them, and they have some power over us with magnets. We're going to have a lot of magnets in a pretty short period of time. In fact, we'll have so many we won't know what to do with them.
China dominates rare earth magnet production, producing nearly 70% of global supply in 2024. Earlier this year, China added several rare earth items and magnets to its export restriction list in retaliation for tariff hikes by the United States. Well, the U.S. and China have a temporary tariff truce in place, locking in place levies of 30% on Chinese imports and 10% Chinese duties on American goods. But that truce is scheduled to end in mid-November. We'll be hearing from a guest shortly. Now, Chinese President Xi Jinping has called on Moscow to help Beijing safeguard their security and development interests to build a more equitable international order. The Chinese leader added that both sides should continue deepening strategic mutual trust, as well as unite the countries in the global south. Mr. Xi made those comments as he welcomed the Russian parliament speaker to the country. Vyacheslav Volodin is in China ahead of President Vladimir Putin's trip for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization this weekend. More than 20 world leaders will be attending the Regional Security Forum in Tianjin in a show of Global South solidarity. And that includes Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, set for his first visit to China in more than 7 years. Moscow is also eyeing trilateral talks with Beijing and New Delhi, both buyers of Russian energy. China has filed a formal complaint against Japan over Tokyo's reported call to boycott Beijing's military parade next week.
中国政府隆重纪念中国人民抗日战争暨世界反法西斯战争胜利80周年，是为了铭记历史、缅怀先烈、珍爱和平、开创未来。任何正直坦荡面对历史、切实汲取历史教训、真正致力于和平发展的国家，都不会对此心怀疑虑，甚至提出异议。
The Victory Day parade in Beijing will involve tens of thousands of participants and showcase new weapons projecting China's growing military might. Russian President Vladimir Putin will attend as guest of honor, alongside several foreign dignitaries. Most Western leaders, however, are expected to stay away, turning the event into a display of solidarity among China, Russia, and the global south. Well, India is overhauling how it acquires weapons by making it easier for domestic companies to supply military technology. The move is part of a years-long push by the Modi government for self-reliance in defense production, coming at a time of security tensions with China and Pakistan. Ishangak with this report.
The future of warfare. is small but mighty. Made by Indian startup Idea Forge, this is the Q4I UAV, a surveillance drone that can be folded and carried in a soldier's backpack and deployed to monitor India's extensive and often porous borders.
For getting a first instance information, also getting live updates as to what is happening across the border, and as well as any catching on the infiltration part.
The drone can also carry small payloads, making it ideal for a range of missions, from reconnaissance to logistics support. In recent years, the war in Ukraine and conflicts at the India-Pakistan border have shown how drones can go toe-to-toe with jets and tanks as a weapon of choice. They are cheap to build, easy to mass produce, and don't endanger the human operators. It's especially crucial for a country like India, whose borders range from arid deserts to frigid mountains. And it's why military demand for unmanned aerial vehicles is taking off.
Not just ISR or reconnaissance drones, but also kamikaze drone, loiter munition drones, and also logistics drones are the different platforms and portfolios that they are willing to integrate now as part of their overall arsenal.
Idea Forge recently won a $16 million contract with the Indian Army under new initiatives that have made it easier and quicker for innovative local companies to supply the military. India now has over 1,000 defense startups from just a handful in 2016, and they are part of the government's ambition to diversify its suppliers and modernize homegrown capabilities. India is one of the world's biggest arms importers, with Russia its biggest supplier. But Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government has been pushing hard to increase domestic production by incentivizing local startups, creating defense manufacturing hubs, and also making procurement easier. In this year's annual budget, India's defense spending increased by roughly 10% to $81 billion. Prime Minister Narendra Modi says this push has given India a degree of strategic autonomy, which enabled it to plan and execute airstrikes on Pakistan in May.
क्या ऑपरेशन सिंदूर इतनी त्वरित गति से हम कर पाते हैं? पता नहीं कौन सप्लाई देगा नहीं देगा, साजो सामान मिलेगा नहीं मिलेगा, इसी की चिंता बनी रहती।
In reality, India still depends heavily on Russian fighter jets, French aircraft, and electronics from the US and Israel, making military operations vulnerable to vetoes and sanctions. But India has also been exploring technology transfers and partnerships with its foreign suppliers in an effort to close the knowledge gap.
Radars, electronic warfare equipment are places which are hampering the momentum forward of India's defense production.
India has had some success in developing advanced military tech, even exporting its BrahMos precision cruise missiles to the Philippines. And experts say the country may find buyers in Europe too, as NATO countries commit to increase defense spending. Piece by piece, India is assembling the components to become a defense powerhouse, creating opportunities for startups like Idea Forge to let their innovations take flight. Ishan Garg, CNA, New Delhi.
Circling back to our top story, U.S. President Donald Trump has warned China to deliver magnets to the U.S. or face 200% tariffs. Now, the threat comes as top Chinese trade negotiator heads to Washington this week for talks. And for more, we are joined now by Yue Su, a principal economist at the Economist Intelligence Unit. Well, thanks for joining us this evening. So, Yue Su, let's first talk about how Trump is framing this issue as national security. How serious exactly is this threat, and what does it tell us about U.S. priorities at this point?
Sure. I think Trump's bluffing skills is kind of common to the market. So the 200% threat is definitely not going to be taken seriously by the market, because as we observed it in the past few months, I think we all have a sense about limitations of how far Trump could really go with tariff. So I think the 200% is just going to be a threat by itself. However, definitely, I think it's definitely will going to serve as a reminder of a sharp escalation of U.S.-China trade war back in April. So I think the market will continue to be really nervous at this point. But I think this also will serve as a bargaining chip from Trump's side, as you mentioned, that the China side is going to visit Washington for more detailed trade talks.
So you've mentioned that, possibly, potentially just bluffing on Trump's side, but this 200% tariff warning, though, I mean, somehow, does it still indicate, show that China's rare earth leverage is actually hitting home?
Yeah, exactly, for sure. I think China is definitely dominate the processing of rare earths. So the U.S. side is really rely a lot by different industries, not only electronics, but also defense industry, for example. So it also reflects the China's dominate position in the supplies, and also reflect how much the U.S. is rely on China, and it's really hard to diversify away from China. So that's why we observe this 200% threat. So I think, but on the other hand, in the near term, I don't think, even from the trade perspective, the U.S. is ready to leave China or completely reduce the reliance on China on other products away from the rare earths.
So, well, tensions are simmering, over trade and rare earths. And President Trump, he has sort of spelled out his approach. And Yue Su here, just listen to this Trump soundbite.
In terms of playing the cards, we have much bigger and better cards than they do. But with that being said, I think we have a great relationship. I spoke to President Xi fairly recently, and at some point, probably during this year or shortly thereafter, we'll go to China. And I think we're going to see a magnificent sight.
So, Yue Su, we heard there, Trump talking about these so-called bigger cards, right, that they have on China. But he's always talking big, as you've mentioned, on tariffs or all sorts of potential punishment. But how much of this do you think is a bluff? What's he trying to indicate here?
I think Trump sent mixed message. The first sentence is that the U.S. has a lot of cards, and indeed, the U.S. has a lot of cards. For example, tariff is one policy to another one could be the AI chips export control, and perhaps another one will be how the U.S. will dealing with transshipment, which will affect Southeast Asia as well. But as you mentioned, as you can see in the video, Trump also said that he has a good relation with the President Xi, and he's willing to come to China. So that indicates that both sides, so both the U.S. and China, would want to have the relationship stabilized for the rest of the year, as both economy will be hit hard if the de facto embargo actually happens. So I think I do see that Trump sent mixed message, and according to the video, I think he tries to highlight the second part of his conversation, which is he's willing to come to China and have a really a good deal from China end.
Yeah, and you've highlighted that, he added that statement saying that he's planning to visit the U.S. The plan is he's got the desire to visit China by year's end. But from now to year's end, there could be more rhetoric coming from Trump. So this kind of rhetoric, this kind of big talk, do you think it could escalate tensions? And what would that mean also for the ongoing trade truce and negotiations that apparently is going to expire in November?
I think from our observation, so both sides has the willingness to stabilize the trade relation a little bit moving forward. However, the risk of escalation is really high, as the announcement today on 2% tariff threat is definitely not a comeback of Liberation Day moment. However, it does serve as a reminder of the sharp escalation. And that's the first reason. And second thing is that Trump's own unpredictability. So anything could happen under President Donald Trump. So which means that if the trade talks didn't go well, potentially we could see an escalation from both sides, which means this could disrupt any trade talks, as well as the agreement on export control on either rare earths or chips or AI-related chips. So I would say that even if both sides has the willingness to have a real truce, but the risk of escalation is really high. And of course, Trump wanted to visit China and potentially Asia, potentially during the month of October, where he potentially would stop over in South Korea for the APEC summit. However, as we mentioned, the risk of escalation is high, so we are not very sure that Trump could visit China within the year of 2025. So I think it's still fair to say that China and the U.S. trade relations remain very fragile at this stage.
And also, given the current standoff, from China's point of view, what are some of the moves we can expect China to make, in this rare earth and trade dispute in the days and months to come?
Sure. I think based on the observation in the past few months, I think it's fair to say that China is always ready to punch back. So whatever policy Trump come up with, we can expect China would punch back really decisively, as we observed in April. So that's the I think it's kind of the market consensus. And second, I think China has already shows what policy tools that it can rely on. For example, the rare earths is definitely a very punchy and very effective policy tools that China could really leverage and bring back the U.S. To the negotiation table. And of course, China has other tools. For example, China could potentially increase tariff on the U.S. products entering its market, for example, the energy products and agriculture products, by delay the custom clearance. So China does have a lot of cards to play, and it's ready to punch back. So I wouldn't say that the China side would willing to take any compromise in order to appease Trump, as happened to other countries, for example. So again, I think this highlighted the really fragile relation between the two sides.
Well, some great analysis there. Thanks so very much for joining us this evening. Yue Su, Principal Economist at the Economist Intelligence Unit. Right, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, postal services in the region pausing shipments to the U.S. as an exemption for certain import taxes is about to expire. And the battleground for the scope of copyright law in generative AI broadens to Japan, with its largest media groups suing artificial intelligence search engine Perplexity.
In the world of trade, it helps to be part of a network.
Well, not just any network. UOB's network.
The most extensive network in ASEAN.
Through this network, you can connect directly to my business.
And mine.
And mine.
And mine!
With this network, you can source for supplies big
and small across supply chains.
And connect to sector specialists through 500 UOB offices globally.
With access to an end-to-end platform that syncs up your entire value chain.
For a complete view of your trade and cash position across borders on one single interface.
And that's what makes UOB the one bank for ASEAN.
It's where the region's most extensive trade network meets a truly integrated supply chain platform. And there's just one more thing to say. Be part of ASEAN's most extensive trade network.
Mr. Lee Kuan Yew made an urgent call to Dr. Toh Chin Chye and Mr. Rajaratnam, asking them both to come up to Kuala Lumpur for an urgent secret meeting.
Lee Kuan Yew had to manage his cabinet colleagues because not all of them agreed to separation.
Lord Head, who is the British High Commissioner in Kuala Lumpur, driving around trying to find the Tunku.
The British were deliberately kept in the dark. So there's a sense of embarrassment.
The belief was that leaders of Singapore were all caught by surprise. Now we know there was a negotiated separation.
Lee Kuan Yew, who was emotional and exhausted, had not slept for 3 days.
Really, Singaporeans, I can't call myself a Malaysian now. We unite.
Very chaotic moment.
Midnight later tonight here in Thailand, it's too little too late.
And I asked whether there's a political element to it. Nobody can exactly tell you why.
Look, things are never perfect when you're engaged in politics. Each one doing what each one wants.
So what's the United Nations doing amidst this world of supreme chaos?
We're pushing for answers every night on Asia Tonight.
Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight. You are just in time for some business news with Roland Lim. So, Roland, I hear that the Chinese e-commerce company, the big one, Temu, they're going back to its old playbook to try and make headway into the US market. How's that coming along?
Right, Oteli, yes. The same old playbook that helped it grow rapidly in the early days. Temu clearly signaled it wants to protect market share. Now, Temu has reportedly resumed shipping of its goods from Chinese factories directly to the US. It's also boosted advertising spending in the region, expecting a return to first quarter levels from before US President Trump's sweeping tariffs. The Financial Times reports the direct shipments resumed in July after Temu suspended them 2 months earlier. This, along with increased ad spend, comes as the US is set to cancel the de minimis exemptions from this Friday, meaning that all low-cost parcels will be subject to tariffs. It also follows a trade truce between Washington and Beijing, which has given reprieve to low-value goods exporters. Mr. Trump had planned to cancel the low-cost shipments exemption in April, allowing shipments worth less than $800 US to enter the country duty-free. Now, this would impact Temu, handling most of its supplies' customs formalities. US-China talks led to Washington imposing extra tariffs on Chinese goods to 30% for 90 days. This was extended for another 90 days this month. The Financial Times says the levies imposed are still more cost-effective for Temu than maintaining warehousing and inventory in the US. Conversely, postal services elsewhere in the region are temporarily suspending low-value shipments bound for the US. Japan, Taiwan, South Korea postal services announcing pauses to their services. This comes just days ahead of Washington's duty exemption for low-value goods coming to an end. The mail services say uncertainty from changes to customs rules makes operations extremely difficult. Effective Friday, goods coming into the U.S. from abroad will be slapped with country-specific tariffs. Now, for an $800 item coming in from a country with a tariff rate of 25% or more, well, that could amount to at least $200 in extra costs just to bring the product into the U.S. Letters and personal gifts worth less than $100 will still be duty-free. Taiwan's Chunghua Post also too allowing postages that excludes goods. It says the decision to halt most US-bound shipments is due to the lack of systems allowing postal services to collect tax payments from senders. The de minimis exemption had allowed U.S. consumers to buy cheap goods from abroad because of its duty-free customs rule. It was revoked after a presidential order signed in July, intended to prevent the inflow of illegal drugs such as fentanyl. The change has rocketed small businesses and consumers, leaving many concerned about shipping backlogs and higher costs. Now, some businesses owners have said on social media that they will be forced to close up shop. Two of Japan's largest media companies are suing Perplexity AI. Nikkei and the Asahi Shimbun newspapers have jointly filed a lawsuit against the search engine over alleged copyright infringement. They accused Perplexity of copying and storing their articles and wrongly attributing its answers to the news websites, in turn harming their credibility. The news providers call out Perplexity for undermining the efforts of journalists and the foundations of journalism. Nikkei and Asahi are seeking damages of $15 million each. And this comes a day after the San Francisco-based firm said it'll begin paying out millions of dollars to media outlets as part of a new model for sharing search revenue with publishers. The Japanese firms are the latest to take legal action against the AI startup. Dow Jones and the New York Post blame Perplexity for what they deem as illegally copying their works and diverting customers alongside critical revenues. The three media firms have sent cease and desist letters to Perplexity to stop using their content to train its AI model. Nissan facing another setback as it undergoes a major restructuring after merger talks with rival Honda collapsed earlier this year. Its second biggest stakeholder, Mercedes-Benz, offloaded its entire stake in the automaker, sending its shares tanking more than 6% today. Mercedes-Benz says its pension fund reportedly sold shares worth about $346 million. The stocks were sold at a 6% discount to Nissan's yesterday's close. The two companies had a tie-up 15 years ago following the 2008 financial crisis in a bid to lower development and production costs. Nissan's largest stakeholder and longtime alliance partner Renault had also been seeking to offload part of its 36% stake. Nissan has been facing rising competition from Chinese EV manufacturers. Its share price previously rose after Mr. Trump pledged to lower tariffs on autos to 15%. But its market capitalization remains below $10 billion. Since the start of the year, its share price has tumbled some 28%, underscoring the pressure on the automaker struggling to execute a turnaround plan. Japan is set to invest $68 billion in India. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba will unveil the plan during his summit with his counterpart Narendra Modi on Friday. The investments spread over the next 10 years will help Japanese companies in fields such as AI and semiconductors to expand into the subcontinent. Japan also plans to hire more Indian specialist workers in firms back home. The plan comes as both countries seek to strengthen cooperation and business ties. Now, New Delhi is interested in Tokyo's strengths in chip-related materials and equipment, while Tokyo eyes the nation's growing engineering talent population. India possesses the world's largest population, which can serve as a bridge to help Japanese companies set up shop in the country. And that'll do it for business. Ochali.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Well, we are going to go for a break now, but coming up in East Asia tonight, South Korean President Myung pulls off a high-stakes summit with his American counterpart, Donald Trump. Was the outcome what he had hoped for? Well, we'll be speaking with Dr. Yong-mi Kim from the University of Edinburgh for more insights.
In Singapore, something happens every minute. Each event vying for your attention. We're always there to cover the news. But what if we also give you more? What if we told you we go deep into the data? find stories you care about, and explain issues clearly, from housing to healthcare, security to sustainability. We give you the bigger picture on Singapore Tonight.
3, 2, 1.
Hello and good evening. I'm Shahida Othman. Tonight's top stories.
This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Donald Trump firing a fresh warning shot at Beijing, this time threatening 200% tariffs. In this latest trade threat, the U.S. president wants magnets, of which China controls nearly 70% of the global supply. A Chinese President Xi Jinping urges Russia to help Beijing safeguard security and development interests. That call made as Mr. Xi hailed ties with Moscow as stable and mature. South Korea lauds the first summit between President Myung and Donald Trump as a success, but observers say key issues remain unresolved. While the Trump-Xi summit did not result in lower U.S. tariffs for South Korea, the two leaders did agree on several areas of cooperation. But as Lim Yun-suk reports, some observers remain skeptical.
It was all smiles between U.S. President Donald Trump and South Korean President Lee Jae-myung as they spoke to the media. Mr. Lee did not hold back his praise of Mr. Trump, even calling him the only leader who could act as a peacemaker and bring lasting peace on the Korean peninsula. South Korea's presidential spokeswoman Kang Yoo-jung said the summit helped the two leaders build trust, and it went so well there was no need for a joint statement. The leaders reaffirmed cooperation across various fields, with 11 MOUs signed between companies from both sides in areas such as shipbuilding, nuclear energy, and aviation. South Korea's opposition party, however, blasted the summit meeting, calling it a diplomatic disaster and saying it was unclear what was agreed on, if anything. Analysts in Seoul are also divided. Some say President Lee played his cards right, avoiding more pressure to pay more for U.S. troops stationed in South Korea. Others warn the summit may have left new burden, especially after President Trump hinted he wanted ownership of South Korean land, currently leased to house U.S. military bases under a legally agreed framework. With no joint statement, it's unclear if China came up at the summit despite Mr. Yi's desire to strengthen ties with Beijing. Nor is it clear if the two discussed strategic flexibility, referring to the use of U.S. forces for expanded operations, including countering China. Mr. Yi previously said this would be difficult to agree with, amid concerns South Korea could be dragged into a conflict over Taiwan.
중국이 대만을 침공하려면 반드시 북한을 사주해서 미국의 전략 자산을 최대한 한반도에 묶어두기 위한 그런 도발을 하게 만들 것이고, 똑같은 이치로 북한도 한국을 공격하려면 미국의 전력을 최대한 대만으로 분산시키기 위해서 중국과 공모하지 않겠습니까? 미국으로서는 한반도 정부와 대만 정부를 엄격히 실제로 분리하기 어려울 겁니다.
The two leaders also discussed the possibility of Mr. Trump meeting with North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un as early as this year. Mr. Yi is hoping that would pave the way for better inter-Korean ties. But some analysts earlier said a U.S.-North Korea summit was unlikely to improve inter-Korean relations.
미국 대화를 하면은 관계 개선을 추구할 것이냐, 저는 좀 회의를 가지고 있습니다. 2023년도에 남북 관계 단절, 또 이민족 이렇게 얘기를 하면서 핵무력에 의한 무력 통일을 추구한다고 얘기를 했는데, 김정은이 이렇게 조치를 하는 거는 성공한 남한이 있는 그 자체가 위협인 거죠.
Despite the smiles, analysts say follow-up talks are essential on issues like alliance modernization, defense cost sharing, and trade negotiations. For now, many issues remain unchanged even after the high-profile summit. Lim Yan-suk, CNA, Seoul.
Well, South Korea's leader also pledged during his visit to the U.S. that he would boost defense spending, and he vowed a more proactive role for Seoul in its alliance with Washington. Well, CNA's Grace Chin has dropped by the studio here to help us break down America's military footprint in the country. Grace?
Thanks, Otelli. Around 28,500 American service members are stationed in South Korea today, a legacy of the Korean War 7 decades ago. Their mission, deter the North. Now, if deterrence fails, they fight beside South Korean forces under a combined command. Now, Seoul sits just south of the demilitarized zone near the 38th parallel, and the hub today is Camp Humphreys, the largest U.S. base overseas. Air power comes from Osan and Gunsan, covering central and southwestern skies. U.S. military presence dates back to 1953. That's when Washington and Seoul signed the Mutual Defense Treaty after the Korean War armistice. Now, in 1966, a status of forces agreement set legal grounds. Then, fast forward to 1978, a combined forces command unified war fighting. Then in 2006, a deal on strategic flexibility let Seoul opt out of unwanted regional wars. And in 2023, the Washington Declaration created a nuclear consultative group to deepen day-to-day denuclearization planning. Now, last year, the allies initialed their 12th Special Measures Agreement covering the years of 2026 to 2030. There, Seoul's contribution rises 8.3% in the year of 2026, then tracks inflation but cannot exceed 5% a year. And a U.S. audit shows that from the years 2016 to 19, Washington spent roughly $5.5 billion on operations, housing, and construction. Seoul, on the other hand, paid a bit more, $5.8 billion, including fees for the Yongsan relocation plant that built Camp Humphreys. Now, during his first term in office, President Trump demanded roughly $5 billion a year from Seoul. That's almost 5 times their existing payment. He even later floated the amount to $10 billion, prompting backlash in South Korea. And some in Washington argue a wealthy ally should pay more as missions grow. Critics in South Korea have stressed that North Korea's Hwasong-17 and 18 ICBMs can already hit the U.S. mainland, so risks and costs are shared. Seoul also weighs China's reaction. If you recall, the 2017 deployment of the U.S. THAAD missile defense battery triggered Chinese economic retaliation. And today, strategic flexibility carries new weight as Washington eyes how U.S. forces Korea could assist in crises beyond the peninsula, including Taiwan. Now, here's the bottom line. America's footprint in South Korea is insurance against the North, reassurance for an ally, and a launch pad for the wider Indo-Pacific. The open question, how far should strategic flexibility go, and who should flex? More on the bill. That's all I have for you. Back to you, Vitaly.
Well, thanks so very much for that, Grace. Well, to help us understand a little bit more about the summit, let's bring in Dr. Young-Mi Kim, Head of Korean Studies at the University of Edinburgh, where she also serves as Director of the Scottish Centre for Korean Studies. Well, thanks, Dr. Kim, for joining us today. First up, I want to talk about the summit. It wrapped up without a joint statement, but there were plenty of signals from both sides. From your perspective, what was the real takeaway? What message should we be reading between the lines?
I think from their summit meeting, Mr. Lee commented that President Trump could be peacemaker. I think this is a big message that gives that he can have a conversation with Kim Jong-un, and also he can play a role in other area of conflictual areas.
Right. So in a nutshell, the summit sort of ended without drama, which was the Koreans have seen it as a good thing. But there was no concrete deals, right, whether it's on troop funding or tariffs. So what does it tell us about the road ahead for both sides?
They built quite a bit of MOU in shipbuilding industry and also nuclear, etc., and also aviation. I think South Korean government was ready to make this investment as U.S. requested. Probably there's supposed to be a mutual agreement for both could win.
Yeah, having said that, it's a non-binding deal, though. I mean, this $350 billion in U.S. investments, it sounds like it's more than just economics, right? I mean, there's politics as well. So how should we understand Seoul's calculation here?
I think this is kind of known that Korean government should spend more on military defense. At the same time, investment in the U.S. But good sign over this summit is that South Korean president met Japanese prime minister before the meeting. And also there was a conversation that President Lee and President Trump could visit China, meeting Xi Jinping as well. So probably this is not just a bilateral meeting, but multilateral, summit would help, peaceful environment in the region.
And you brought up shipbuilding earlier, which South Korea to a certain extent is betting big, $150 billion US. The aim is to help revive the troubled US shipbuilding, and some will say is actually to win over Trump. Do you think that's a smart economic strategy? And what sort of risk do you think Seoul will face if the gamble doesn't pay off?
The U.S. could have a better employment policy for the local citizens by, this investment of ship industry. But for South Korean, they can also sell ships to the U.S. So in a way, both governments, they see a positive message out of this summit meeting. But then again, the actual procedure is not really detailedly outlined. So it could be lagging, or it could, we don't actually know how.
Quite a few things, we don't know. Because even
it could be materialized.
Yeah, because even the troops as well, right? I mean, 28,500 U.S. troops stationed in South Korea, but the question of how much should South Korea be paying for the U.S. troops to remain, that's unresolved. How tough a battle do you see that becoming? And is there any leverage that Seoul really have?
South Korea is geopolitical place, not just protecting Korean Peninsula itself on the south, but also Japan and now even U.S. is related. So this negotiation should not be only on the budget, burden of South Korean government, but it should be mutual and multilateral.
Now, there's this thing that President Trump floated. I mean, who knows how serious he is about it, but the idea of the U.S. actually owning South Korean land, used for its bases. Trump has also said the same thing before about Greenland, the Panama Canal, and all of that. Do you think Seoul could actually be facing a new negotiating reality here?
I don't think that's realistic, because I see that's Mr. Trump's negotiating strategy, but that's South Korean land. And, there's a, kind of a misunderstanding of both government who owns the territory of U.S. base. To me, it's a little bit nonsense, a bit dodgy to declare who owns the land. It's not the matter of who owns the land. This is more about bilateral defense place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so very much for clarifying that point there. Thanks for your time and thoughts. Dr. Myung Kim from the University of Edinburgh. Well, in other news, China has rejected a protest lodged by Japan over its development of gas fields in a disputed East China Sea. Beijing called Tokyo's accusations groundless as it asserts that its activities in the region are within waters under its jurisdiction. Tokyo found 2 more Chinese drilling rigs setting up in the area, bringing the total number up to 21. And there are also concerns in Japan that the rigs, all positioned at the Chinese side of the de facto maritime border, risk extracting gas that's found on the Japanese side. Both countries in 2008 had reached an agreement to jointly develop gas reserves in a disputed area, with a ban on independent drilling by any one party. But negotiations over the deal's implementation were suspended in 2010. The Japanese Foreign Ministry called China's choice to advance unilateral development in the area extremely regrettable, and it urged Beijing to re-enter talks as soon as possible based on the 2008 agreement. All right, breaks up next. But coming up on East Asia tonight, the legacy left by Japanese colonizers in Taiwan, 80 years after the end of World War II.
"80 years after the end of World War II, Japan starts to rearm.
Of course, Japanese people want peace, but way towards peace is not just pacifism. Sometimes you can ensure peace by deterrence.
It's public that Xi has ordered his military to be capable of invading Taiwan by 2027.
China is increasing its military activities in the Taiwan Strait. Tensions are definitely rising this year compared to previous years.
How many wars did the United States fight? The Chinese military, in spite of its rapid rise, hasn't even killed a single foreigner overseas. Isn't that miraculous?
I am deeply concerned. Big powers are now talking about the use of nuclear weapons.
Progress and pain during Japan's 5-decade-long occupation of Taiwan. Ties that endure and wounds that linger 80 years on. Japan's colonial experiment in Taiwan. Tonight on CNA.
The first thing in the morning as Asia wakes up to a new day. Get up to speed with major events shaping lives in the region and other parts of the world.
Putting things in perspective with eye-opening reports and expert analysis as a new era of global politics breeds power struggles and shifting alliances.
We get to the heart of the matter and take stock of the issues you're invested in with on-the-ground reports and wall-to-wall coverage. Viewing it all from a regional lens because we put Asia first.
This is the first of, we hope, several happy villages.
We develop a material that can capture carbon dioxide quickly.
We can use AI to understand how our human brain actually works.
We're helping founders build the product that customers really want.
My hope for Project Sabat is that it can expand more to other rural areas in Cambodia.
Innovations that matter. On demand at cna.asia.
Brought to you by the National University of Singapore.
Japan's defeat during World War II ended its decades-long colonization of Taiwan. 80 years on, Japan is only now starting to recognize the sacrifices of Taiwanese soldiers. It's also recognizing how expulsion of Japanese from the island still haunts a group known as Wansei. CNA's Michio Ishida has more on what remains of this legacy.
It's a sort of homecoming for Hisashi Niimoto every time he visits Taiwan. The 93-year-old is one of an estimated 200,000 Japanese known as Wansei, meaning born in Taiwan. Specifically, during imperial rule from 1895 to 1945. Then, as many as 1 in 3 Taipei residents were Japanese. Education was in Japanese, and districts were modeled after Japan's. This was Mr. Niimoto's city home, located in a former dormitory area for Japanese civil servants. After Japan surrendered, ending World War II, the Wansei had to leave behind the lives they built and return to Japan. I visited Mr. Niimoto in Tokyo, where he has been living since. Mr. Niimoto remembers vividly the days before departure.
45年の5月31日、台北絨毯爆撃があった。淡水川の向こう側にね、高射砲陣地があって、それの地下壕掘りの動員になって、総督の方に爆弾が落っこってね、ズドーンズドーンと音が聞こえてきて、初めて防空壕に入れてくれたん。それで最後の人が200名防空壕に入って、蓋を閉めた途端に防空壕の入り口に500キロの爆弾が落っこって。
Strategically vital to Japan, Taiwan suffered devastating airstrikes during World War II. Official data showed nearly 6,000 people were killed. After Japan's defeat, Mr. Niimoto's father had to hand over his thriving sugarcane business to the new government. The rest of the family left first, with just a case and bag of belongings each.
父が帰ってくるまではね、お金がないんで、母がね、受産所っていうところで洋裁して、姉は昭和ゴムっていうところに勤めて、それで私は進駐軍のところにアルバイトして、甘いものがないのが一番苦しかった。
Here in Yokohama, a memorial was erected in April 2025 for Taiwanese soldiers who died while serving in the Japanese military during World War II. It's at a Buddhist temple called Shinshoji. It was in fact proposed by a Taiwanese soldier who was attached to a Japanese unit and later taken prisoner. Masao Go was one of more than 200,000 Taiwanese who served in the Japanese military then, and the sole survivor in his unit, as far as the 98-year-old knows.
日本人の作った旧軍隊の日本人の慰霊があちこちあるわけね。ところが台湾人の戦没者慰霊はね、ないわけだ。で、噂で聞いているのは、奥多摩の産地があるのは聞いていたけど、まだ僕は見てなかったんだね。どっかに建てたいという希望が持っておりましたね。
He was studying in Tokyo under the name Masao Oyama when reports of Japan's military success inspired him to join a military training school. He was 16 and the only Taiwanese there. He set his sight on becoming a suicide pilot. After Japan surrendered, Mr. Masao was captured and sent to a labor camp in what is now Kazakhstan. He was repatriated to Japan in 1947, where he has lived since. Here in Shinshoji Temple, its chief abbot, like most Japanese, says he did not know about the role of Taiwanese soldiers, though an estimated 30,000 of them died, until Mr. Masao approached him about erecting a memorial in December.
日本のためにっていうね、本当に純粋な気持ちで戦っていただいたことに対してね、やっぱり感謝の気持ちですね。で、それから忘れないということですね。日本の教育の中ではそういうものがなかったということですね。ですからないから余計ね、呉さんのこういう日をね、早く作って一般の人にどんどん理解してもらいたいなっていうのがありましたね。はい。
The abbot hosted a grand ceremony last month, fulfilling Mr. Masao's long-held wish. Engraved on the cenotaph are words from his heart. Michio Ishida, CNA, Yokohama, Japan.
For more on Japan's 50-year rule of Taiwan and the Wansei generation, catch CNA correspondent tonight at 9 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time, or anytime on our CNA.Asia or on YouTube. Now, a Chinese firm is gaining a competitive advantage despite recent U.S. tariffs on imports. It made a strategic move, investing on American soil.
Early last year, this Chinese copper firm built a factory in Texas. It was a gamble that is now paying off in the backdrop of President Donald Trump's trade war.
我们本土采购、本土销售的角度来说，我们因为有我们美国的工厂，所以我觉得在未来我们在服务美国客户、本土购买、本土销售来说，加藤反而是拥有了更多的优势，对我们来说应该是个利好。
The company's plant in Grand Prairie will start production later this year, and by 2028 churn out 3,000 tons of copper flat wire annually for U.S. clients like automaker Stellantis. Because Wellison's products are produced locally, the factory shields U.S. customers from the 50% tariffs imposed on copper wire imports. And demand is hot. It's a rare case where a Chinese company has benefited despite U.S. tariffs being designed to counter China's industrial dominance.
This is pretty unusual. One, because they've actually have technology and production that the U.S. needs, so it fits the needs. But two, that they also got in under the radar, meaning they got in before the tariffs, so it actually gives them the ability to push back against competitors because they don't have the 50% tariff, whereas their competitors do.
While Wellison's investment achieves Washington's goal of bringing industry to the U.S., it also underscores ambivalence among U.S. policymakers about whether to welcome Chinese companies. According to Mr. Johnson, Chinese investment, especially in manufacturing, began tapering off after Mr. Trump's first term and has now stalled. He says Washington's hostile attitude is now echoed in Beijing, where regulators are encouraging firms to avoid the U.S. But Mr. Chiang says his firm faced no regulatory issues, winning approval from Chinese and U.S. authorities. It plans to invest $100 million in the U.S. plant, which is expected to generate more than half of the company's overseas revenue within 3 years.
And that wraps up Tuesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at CNA.Asia. And you can always find us on Facebook and YouTube as well. Thanks for watching.